Welcome back, everybody. Ready to power up your knowledge?
Oh, yeah.
We're taking a deep dive into a fascinating company today,
Sure.
Power Grid Infrastructure Investment Trust. It's India's first PSU in VI2. And we're going to break down what they do, how they're performing, and what it all means for India's energy scene. We've got company profiles, some financial reports, and even some market analysis.
Right. A unique company for sure. Kind of brings together infrastructure and investment. We'll figure out what makes them tick and why investors are interested.
Okay, let's get into it. First off, what exactly does Power Grid InvIT do? What's their role in the energy world?
Basically, they're all about power transmission. Those giant towers and lines that carry electricity across India.
Yeah.
That's Power Grid InvIT. They own, operate, and invest in all that.
Yeah.
Keeping the energy flowing.
Okay, so they're like the veins and arteries of India's power grid.
Exactly.
And I see they're connected to Power Grid Corporation of India. Is that like a parent company?
Yeah, exactly. Power Grid Corporation is the sponsor and manager of the InvIT. They provide the initial assets and have a big say in making decisions. Think of them as the experienced guide.
So they're the power behind the power.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you could say that.
Now, our source calls this India's first PSU InvIT. What's so special about that? What does PSU even mean?
PSU stands for Public Sector Undertaking. It basically means a company owned by the Indian government.
Okay.
So Power Grid InvIT being the first PSU InvIT is a pretty big deal. It's the first time a government-owned entity like Power Grid Corporation has used this investment trust structure,
So it's a way to raise capital from investors.
Right, and channel it into these power transmission projects.
Interesting. So instead of the government just funding it directly, they're opening it up to investors. But what exactly IS and InvIT? Break it down for us.
Okay. Think of it kind of like a mutual fund, but for infrastructure.
All right.
It pools money from investors to buy and operate things like power transmission lines. Investors then get a share of the income generated by those assets.
So it's a way to invest in something tangible, something that literally powers our lives.
Yeah.
And because it's publicly traded, we can track things like share prices and, those financial reports, right?
Exactly.
Speaking of those reports, let's take a look at the numbers. What jumps out at you?
Well, first of all, those operating profit margins are incredible.
Yeah, 99% in several quarters. That's almost unheard of. What's the secret sauce? How are they achieving that?
It definitely shows they're efficient and profitable. The operating profit margin tells us how much profit they're making on their core business after taking out operating expenses. 99% suggests that they're keeping costs incredibly low.
Wow.
Now, this could due to a couple of things. The regulatory environment in India, the structure of power purchase agreements, and even potentially a lack of competition in certain areas.
So it's not just operational efficiency, but the whole ecosystem they operate in.
Right.
Makes sense. And on top of that, their debt levels are practically non-existent.
Absolutely. Minimal debt is generally a good sign, especially for an InvIT that aims to provide stable returns to investors.
So far, everything seems very positive, but I did notice one thing in the stock analysis flagged as a potential con-low promoter holding. Now, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what promoter holding means. Can you explain that?
Sure. Promoter holding refers to the percentage of shares owned by the company's founders or promoters. In this case, Power Grid Corporation. A low promoter holding can sometimes be concerning for a typical company.
Okay.
Raises questions about their commitment,
So why is it a potential concern? Does it mean they're losing interest in Power Grid and VIT?
It's not that simple. A low promoter holding in a more traditional company can sometimes signal a lack of confidence. But the situation's different with InvITs. Remember, InvITs are designed for broader public investment.
So a lower promoter holding might actually be by design in this case.
Exactly. It aligns with the structure and purpose of an InvIT, which is to distribute ownership and allow for more public participation.
Okay, so we've got a company playing a critical role in India's energy infrastructure with impressive financials and operating within this unique InvIT structure. This is fascinating, but what does it all mean for someone considering investing in Power Grid InvIT?
Well, based on this initial information, I'd say it's definitely worth a deeper look.
Okay, we've laid the groundwork, but there's still much more to uncover. Let's explore how Power Grid InvIT fits into the larger picture of India's energy landscape. Is this a sign of things to come?
Absolutely. Power Grid InvIT's success could signal a shift in how India finances its infrastructure goals. This could be just the beginning.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back.
We're back and ready to dig deeper into power grid NVIT and its connection to India's energy future. You were saying this could be just the beginning for NVITs in India.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the potential here, the potential of NVITs to fuel India's infrastructure growth.
Okay.
Power grid NVIT's success, it kind of suggests that investors are getting more and more interested in this asset class. So this could open up a whole new way of funding these crucial projects across different sectors.
Exactly. And think about what this means for India's renewable energy targets. They've got those ambitious goals, to transition to cleaner sources of energy.
Right.
And that requires a huge amount of investment in transmission infrastructure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In VITs like power grid could be a key part of making that happen.
That's a great point. So for someone interested in sustainable investing or impact investing, this could be a good way to align their portfolio with those goals.
Absolutely. It's this compelling, intersection of financial opportunity and environmental impact.
For sure.
But let's zoom in a bit and look at those remarkable financials again.
Okay.
Those sky-high operating profit margins, remember. 99% in multiple quarters. That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's definitely mind-blowing. And I noticed they stayed consistently high across those different quarters.
Right.
That suggests a pretty stable and efficient operation, don't you think?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That consistency is definitely reassuring. It suggests their business model is resilient, and can handle changes in the market. Now, their debt, well, actually the lack of it. What are your thoughts on that? Is it always a good thing to have such low debt?
It definitely seems like a sign of financial health.
Hmm.
But could there be a downside? I've heard sometimes companies use debt strategically, to fuel growth. Could power grid and VIT be missing out on opportunities by being so debt averse?
That's a great observation. Debt isn't always a bad thing. It can be a powerful tool for expansion, but you have to use it carefully.
Right.
In VITs, though, they're generally structured to prioritize stable returns.
Okay.
And minimize risk for those investors. They often go for predictable income streams over rapid growth.
So in this case, less debt actually fits their goal of delivering those steady returns. It's about making sure their financial strategy matches their investors' objectives.
Exactly. Now, remember that low promoter holding we talked about earlier? Yeah. We said it's not necessarily a red flag with NVITs, but it's still something investors should consider.
What kind of questions should investors be asking themselves about that lower promoter holding? What are the potential implications?
Well, it raises an important question about the relationship between Power Grid NVIT and its sponsor.
Power Grid Corporation.
Right, Power Grid Corporation. Investors should, really dig into the agreement between those two entities.
Okay.
To see how much influence the sponsor has over the NVIT's decisions. Just because it's publicly traded doesn't mean there isn't a significant relationship there.
Transparency in that relationship is key, then, for investors to make informed decisions. So we've covered Power Grid NVIT's business model, financial performance, and its place in India's evolving energy landscape. Is there anything else we can take away from these sources?
I think one key takeaway is the importance of research and due diligence. Really doing your homework before making any investment decisions. These sources are a good starting point, but that's all they are, a starting point.
Right.
You have to go deeper.
We've given you a glimpse into this fascinating company, but it's up to each individual to dig deeper and really do their own homework. If you're thinking about investing in Power Grid and VIT, don't just take our word for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Explore those financial reports, read analyst opinions, and understand those risks.
Informed decision-making is key.
This has been a really interesting exploration of Power Grid Infrastructure Investment Trust. It's amazing what we can learn from just a few key sources.
It really highlights how important infrastructure is to a growing economy like India, and how innovative things like NVITs can be really transformative.
It also reminds us that the financial world is full of hidden gems just waiting to be discovered. Companies that are quietly powering our lives and maybe offering some really interesting investment opportunities. Speaking of which, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question. What other innovative financing models are out there, quietly shaping our world and maybe offering some exciting investment avenues?
Ooh, that's a great one. What other fascinating companies and sectors are, flying under the radar, just waiting for us to discover them? Maybe that's something for our listeners to think about.
It's like we've shown a light on this one corner of the market, but there's a whole universe of possibilities out there.
Right.
But before we get too carried away with other hidden gems,
Yeah.
let's go back to Power Grid NVIT for a second.
Okay.
One thing I was curious about, the sources mentioned they operate across India, but is there anything specific about, where their projects are located?
Oh, that's an important question for any potential investor. The sources we looked at didn't really go into geographic specifics,
Right.
but you'd want to research that for sure.
Yeah.
Understanding their concentration. Are they spread out across different regions, or are they really focused in a particular state?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing can have a big impact on their risk.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like, what if there's a natural disaster or a regulatory change in one specific region? Could that significantly impact their operations? Seems like something worth looking into.
Definitely.
I also noticed that one of the sources, Screener, had a section on peer comparison.
Uh-huh.
Did you find that helpful at all?
Yeah, I think peer comparison is really useful. It gives you like a benchmark for how Power Grid NVIT is doing.
Okay.
Comparing them to other companies in the same industry, whether that's other NVITs or even just traditional power companies.
Yeah.
You can get a sense of how they measure up.
Right.
Are they doing better, worse?
Yeah.
That could be a valuable signal for you to dig deeper.
So it's like a quick reality check.
Exactly.
I like that. Now, I know you always emphasize going beyond the numbers. What are some other factors, like qualitative things someone might consider when looking at Power Grid NVIT?
Well, their connection to Power Grid Corporation of India is definitely something to think about. It provides, some level of expertise and stability because they're the sponsor. But it also raises some questions, about reliance and influence.
Right, right.
How much does Power Grid Corporation's own performance and decisions impact the NVIT? Are there any potential conflicts of interest for investors?
Yeah.
These are important things to consider.
It's a good reminder that even though Power Grid NVIT is publicly traded, it still operates within this complex network of relationships.
Right.
And, understanding those is key for any smart investor.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We went over Power Grid NVIT's business model, their impressive financials, analyzed their role in India's energy scene, and even touched on some risks and things to think about.
I think these sources have given us a great starting point, but like we said, just a starting point. There's so much more to learn.
Whether you're thinking seriously about investing in Power Grid NVIT or just, interested in this part of the financial world.
There's a whole lot of information out there to uncover.
Absolutely.
And who knows, maybe this deep dive will inspire some of our listeners to start their own investment journeys.
Yeah.
Discover those hidden gems.
Find those companies quietly changing the world.
Yeah, and offering those exciting possibilities.
Keep learning, everyone. There's always something new to discover.
Absolutely. Until next time, happy learning, everybody.